All right. Welcome to tonight's live stream where I'm going to be going through something a little bit different. So welcome to everyone who is joining. I'm going to be going through discursive writing as one type of writing for the craft of writing. Now, of course, I'm happy to answer any questions. This is our weekly Q&A where anyone who joins can ask any question they like, and I'm happy to answer them. Of course, I'm always happy to respond to submissions that you guys have sent. So make sure you use the link in the description of these live streams if you want to get some of your work marked by me live for free on the live stream. So keep submitting those things. We've got hundreds in the pipeline, but something that's come up a lot recently, especially with students that are in the midst of assessment preparation, is discursive writing. And people are also asking about imaginative writing and persuasive writing, but we're really getting into the craft of writing if you're doing the HSC, or reading to write if you're in year 11, or just crafting text in general if you're between year 7 and 12 across New South Wales, Victoria, any state, anywhere. You need to know how to craft a piece of writing based on another text or author that you're studying. So I'm going to be looking at discursive writing in this particular video, this live stream, subject to any other questions coming through. So hello to everyone who is joining. I think we've got a couple of you here now. So let me know in the comments if you are here and if you have any specific questions. Otherwise, I think this is going to be a really detailed, I should say not too detailed, but a very useful, concise video on discursive writing, if there are no other questions that come up. But now that people are starting to get assessment notifications and teachers are telling you guys what you're going to be assessed on, it's a good time to start communicating that to me. Let me know, if you need help guiding you through the actual assessment approach, what you need to do to get prepared to give yourself the best chance at success. And then that way you can hopefully improve and maximize your results. But let's get into it. Discursive writing, I've got a breakdown here. I'm going to share the screen. Feel free to add any questions that you might have along the way, but let's get straight into this and take you through a discursive writing breakdown here. Okay, so I'm going to be sharing this discursive writing tab. Let's make sure this is all working for us. Bang. No, that's not right. We don't like that view. That view's better. Cool. So let's get into it. Discursive writing. Okay, and welcome to the JeddAI live stream for those that are joining. Powered by JeddAI. Make sure if you want expert feedback on all of your work, on your draft essays, on your creative writing pieces, you go to jeddle.com, sign up to JeddAI, and you'll get access to our team of real-life experts, but also unlimited AI-based feedback that's been teacher-trained on your rubrics for your exams. So that's on JeddAI. But right now, discursive writing. What is it? What do I write about in my discursive writing piece? And how do I write it? How do I structure the piece? And what does it sound like? So I'm going to cover those 3 questions. If you have any questions along the way, put them into the chat. So discursive writing, the kind of most challenging type of writing when it comes to imaginative, persuasive, and discursive. And then, of course, there's reflective writing where you write a reflection, but that's kind of more structured and a little bit easier, at least within the context of the craft of writing. So if we're thinking about discursive writing, that term seems to confuse people because imaginative writing is like, that's like a scene from a short story. Yes, it's not a whole short story necessarily, but it's at least like reading a page from within a short story. It has imaginative elements. You can be quite kind of free with your language and your descriptions. You can make up scenes. It can be very fictional. Of course, the discursive can be fictional and made up as well, but it is a free-flowing narrative for an imaginative piece. Okay, there is a narrative, there is a plot, there is a character, something should be happening, maybe just one important thing that you are exploring. There should be lots of imagery, but it is plot and narrative driven, and there's a character and there's a setting. That's the imaginative piece. Most people understand that. That's probably what you've had the most practice doing throughout school. Persuasive writing, you've probably had slightly less experience on than imaginative, but still quite a bit. Writing speeches, trying to persuade someone of a particular perspective. You're trying to actually convince someone to share in your particular view. And all throughout school, you do a lot of public speaking, you get topics, you have to argue a position. that is persuasive writing. You actually have a firm position and you're trying to prove your argument, like an essay. Still different to a text-specific essay, an English essay, but it is the most similar in that respect, that you have a point of view and you're trying to actually prove it and convince the reader, the audience, to share in your perspective. Now, the discursive writing is somewhere in between persuasive and imaginative. It doesn't have a story as such. It doesn't have a narrative arc, but it does have figurative elements, and it can have story elements in the form of an anecdote. Like, you could still incorporate a story from your past to explore a certain perspective. And it's also similar to a persuasive, on the other hand. It's similar to a persuasive because you are looking at different perspectives, and it's more non-fictional in that sense, that you're actually talking about a topic and not a story like the imaginative. So you have a topic, you're looking at different points of view, but the key difference between a discursive piece and a persuasive piece is that the discursive shouldn't come off as strong. It still can come from you. It's a personal opinion. It's a personal piece, just like the persuasive essay or speech could be. But rather than kind of insisting on your perspective being correct, you're actually exploring different perspectives, and the way that it's worded is such that you're not so sure. Like, you're kind of very open. It's very contemplative versus being assertive. Okay, so a persuasive piece is primarily assertive, whereas a discursive piece is more open and contemplative. You're contemplating different points of view, and it's not necessarily clear which one you think is the correct one. You're more just throwing some ideas out there in a structured format, in a very deliberate format, because you want to explore a certain idea or topic. Whereas with a persuasive, you actually have an agenda. I want you to think this about, smoking is bad. And then you prove the points, you give evidence, and you get to your conclusion, and people are convinced of that perspective. So discursive, somewhere in the middle, you can have figurative elements. You can have little short story components like an anecdote from the imaginative, but it's more like a persuasive, I would say, in that it's more non-fictional. It's, and it can be fictional in the sense that you make up the voice. It doesn't have to literally be you writing everything factually. You're just creating a voice that's exploring a certain topic through different perspectives in the discursive. But it's more akin to the persuasive because you have the topic. It's non-fictional. It's probably personal. And the difference is, of course, you are looking at different perspectives, but not saying that this is the correct one and then proving why. You're not doing that. You're saying, here's a perspective. Now I'm going to digress and I'm going to explore this related point about that. Then I'm going to explore this related thing because that's interesting in connection with that point. It's like a free-flowing, thought-sharing reflection. Now, be careful with that word reflection. It's not like the reflection statement that you do as a reflection on your craft of writing, but a discursive piece is similar to a reflective piece of writing in the sense that it's like a personal reflection. Okay, so that's a little intro to it. Discursive versus imaginative versus persuasive. Here's the definition I like. I've broken it down into 4 parts. So what is a discursive? It's a personal contemplation, looking at different perspectives, open-minded. I'm not going to force any one position of different perspectives. Okay, so different perspectives. Actually, I got 3, not 4 there. Different perspectives. So you're considering different viewpoints, but it doesn't necessarily need to be for and against. It's not like that. It's not a discussion, although it's similar. It's not like, here's the reasons why it's good, here's why it's bad. It's more like, here's one kind of perspective on this topic, and that reminds me of this thing about this topic, and there's also this thing to consider about this topic. It doesn't need to literally be for and against and you not having a position, but it can include some for and against in effect. I would just be careful not to word it like that. But you basically have these different perspectives or different kind of subtopics that are relevant to one overall topic, because it says relating to a topic. That's the 4th thing, a topic of interest that you are exploring. Okay, it's a personal exploration of different perspectives relating to a topic. Different perspectives is where a lot of people get caught out because, again, they treat it like this for and against thing, where it's like, here are the reasons why this is good, here are the reasons why smoking's bad. It's not like that. It's more like, here's how smoking came to be, and like, where did smoking come from? And this person realized it was bad when this happened, but funnily enough, when smoking was in, it tied into the way that products were marketed. And then, it's kind of like the whole Mad Men concept, right? About when they were trying to like sell cigarettes, and then it tied into marketing. It's like now you're digressing. You're talking about something related to smoking that's to do with marketing, and then you talk about how we evolved from the marketing to that, and then it's kind of like going on a journey through different related points on a topic, but it's not so much saying, here's why smoking's good, here's why smoking's bad. Okay, I've just chosen smoking as a very random example, but there's not much evidence to suggest it's good. But hopefully you get the point, right? It's not just this debate. You're not having a debate. It's more of a open personal reflection on a topic. It's almost like you sharing your thoughts as they happen. Obviously, you prepare this in advance, at least when you're doing a draft. And then you can improvise, of course, on the day when you're adapting to a different question or stimulus. But at least when you're preparing a draft or getting ready for an assessment and you've already been given the question, you want it to sound like you are just having a very honest, free-flowing, thoughtful conversation or inner dialogue about a certain issue or topic, okay? So it doesn't need to be super structured. It doesn't need to have that for and against. In terms of the personal, let's just break these down very quickly. Yes, I think you should use I, right? It should be from you. It should be my, okay? And it should be personal and honest, like a personal and honest or candid. Candid is a good word, right? It should be an authentic expression of what you think about a certain topic, even though, again, you don't have a strong point of view that you're trying to convince the reader of. But it should have that style. So you want it almost like a stream of consciousness style, where it's like your thoughts are being put onto the page, okay? So it's got a conversational style to it as well. Try not to be overly formal. Avoid overly formal and academic language that you would use in an essay or even persuasive. Okay. The difference is it's a little bit less formal. It's not too colloquial, but there's a casualness to it because you're just having these thoughts and you're sharing your thoughts. Okay. You are sharing your thoughts on a certain issue. Okay. So this idea of sharing, might even add a fifth element here. You're sharing personal and honest thoughts, contemplation of different perspectives relating to a topic. Okay. So the contemplation bit here is you're kind of like openly sharing and thinking about an issue or topic. And we'll talk about how to pick what topic you should talk about in a second. But you're openly sharing and thinking about a topic, not arguing one position like a persuasive. Okay. I'm just trying to show the difference here, because if you understand how it's different to a persuasive essay, because you're probably more familiar with that throughout your schooling, then you'll understand the discursive a lot better. Okay, but the contemplation also comes with this free-flowing nature. Like you can go on tangents. You can digress from one point to another without it being super structured, like versus having like for and against arguments, a for and against debate. It doesn't need to be like a for and against debate, okay? You can digress, which means veer away from one point to another. They might not be super related, but maybe one thing you just expressed triggered a memory of something else or triggered another idea. Of course, you are thinking about this. It just sounds like you're having these kind of improvised thoughts about the topic, okay? Because that ties into the conversational style and the stream of consciousness style that's typical of a discursive. Okay, and then different perspectives is important. Again, doesn't have to be for and against about an issue, okay? It's more like maybe different types of things or categories, different types or categories to do with a topic. Now, if you think about it through the lens of different types and categories, no longer is it about a for and against argument. It's just like, well, here's one type of writer, here's another type of writer, or here's why I like writing about fiction. Okay, like say my topic that I'm writing about is about writing about fiction or writing fiction, so making up a story, and then I'm talking about the craft of writing something fictional, and then I kind of veer off after I've started on that, and I'm like, well, other people like writing about fiction for this reason. And then I provide like some examples. I'm like, I remember speaking to a friend and he liked writing about fiction for this reason. And, in this, then you might even refer to a specific text or a novel or an author. It's like George Orwell used to say fiction is this. It's like, okay, you're giving me different perspectives on why people write fiction. It's not like, here's why writing fiction is good, here's why writing fiction is bad. Okay, so try to think about it less as a for and against debate or argument, and think about it more as, let's just think about all the different categories and types or reasons that someone might like something. It doesn't need to be positive and negative. We don't want it to be that, okay? Different types, categories, reasons to do with a topic, okay? That's what you want. And then what about the topic? The topic itself, I'm going to get into that in a second. Just make sure it's like a specific kind of issue or topic that I would say that ideally is that relates to the nature of writing, or at least creativity. Because if you write about writing, then it's usually far more impressive for a marker. It's usually more relevant to the stimuli that you get. So when you get a question, often they want you to talk about the process of writing itself. You're writing about something to do with writing, or you're writing about something to do with literature. Okay, so try and choose one specific topic. That's the thing I really want to emphasize here. And then we'll make sure it relates to the nature of writing itself. So it's kind of meta. It's meta. You're writing about writing, or you're writing about the craft of something. It might be maybe painting, or it might be some other kind of art form. It doesn't have to be writing about writing, but keep it related to some creative endeavor, some art form. I think that's always good. And it might be about the role of literature over time. I'll go into some examples in a second. That's kind of the second part of this. But choose one specific topic that does relate to that. And then also make sure it relates to your prescribed text in some way, right? Don't make the same argument. Don't talk about the exact same thing. Otherwise, you'll end up just repeating the prescribed text. But try and offer an alternative perspective, or explore a closely related issue or topic. I think staying close to the prescribed text in terms of what that was about, not just using the prescribed text to inspire the way you're writing, the how, because you have to use stylistic elements that the author used. That's the number one purpose. But secondly, I always like to stay somewhat close to their ideas, because there have been questions that have popped up in the past that actually require some kind of connection there. So I think no harm done in making sure you have a topic that's close to your prescribed text, because if you don't get asked a question that requires you to link it to your prescribed text, you can still do that anyway. So you're kind of covering both possibilities by doing that. All right. Just going to the questions, just on pause here for a second. We've got a question from Nala. Nala, what is anomaly? Anomaly is something unusual, something outside of the norm. So if someone is an anomaly, they're probably someone who's different to most people. Okay, so just coming to this for a second, anomaly is someone or something that is different to most things, or it's unusual, it's abnormal. Okay, so if something is anomalous, it's a bit of an outlier. It's something that doesn't usually happen. Okay, so anomalies pop up everywhere. It's kind of a scientific term, strictly speaking, anomaly. So if something is anomalous, it means that wasn't what we expected. It was unexpected, because that isn't normally what happens. So it's not normal. Maybe it's like a character in a story who goes against the social norms. You know how there's always that character, like the protagonist, who stands up for what's right, but everyone else is kind of just following. They're all kind of being sheep. They're conforming. But the protagonist comes in and they rebel, and they are an anomaly. So you can have characters who are anomalous, or an anomaly with a Y at the end. But you can also have events that are anomalies, anomalous events. What's an anomalous event? A tsunami. That's an anomaly. That doesn't normally happen. And it's a catastrophic event. But catastrophes, things that are unexpected, tragedies, are anomalous very often. Hugo asks, when will I be going through your essay submission? Hugo, shoot me an email because I didn't see it in the recent submissions. So I apologize if we've missed it and it was submitted even earlier. Shoot me an email and just remind me now if you're on the chat what essay you submitted. Because at the moment, we're almost caught up. We've got a few in the backlog. But I'm just going through this discursive piece to cover that. I'm sure there'll be more questions and people submit in different examples, but I will get to your essay. Just send me an email or remind me in the chat roughly when you sent it or what the topic was, and I'll make sure I get to that in the next one. So apologies if it's not covered today. Try and cover it next week, next Tuesday, same time. But send me an email, Jonny@Jeddle.com. Jeddle.com. Yes, the global financial crisis was an anomaly. Now, it was an anomaly within the period, but it definitely was an anomaly. But also, we do expect those deviations, those crashes, every 7 to 10 years in an economy. So it was almost paradoxically, it was an expected anomaly. Like we expect these anomalies. We can't quite predict when they're going to happen. That's why it is an anomaly. But we do generally expect that it was going to happen at some point. Something was going to happen. We didn't know it was going to be the GFC. We didn't know it was going to be from that. But yes, that was an outside occurrence. Sophie Ferns, you have Riz HSE GigaChat. Appreciate it. Next one. Great Depression. Yeah, same again. So any economic kind of fluctuation, anything that is outside of the norm, the economy's going well, boom, crash, that is an anomaly as well. All right, let's get back to discursives. Hopefully this is useful for you. Pop that one there. There we go. Okay, what should you write about in a discursive? What should you write about in a discursive? 3 things that you should write about in a discursive. And these are kind of rules or things to guide you, okay? All are true at the same time. You should be writing about something, I believe, to give yourself the best shot. And there are always exceptions. Maybe your teacher tells you otherwise. Maybe it doesn't work for your prescribed text. But generally speaking, these are the 3 rules. You should write about something related to the craft of writing itself, or to creativity, to an art form, to literature, to fiction, okay? Write about the process of writing. That's what a lot of the stimuli in the past HSE questions have addressed. They want you to write about this struggle to write, this process of writing, the different types of writers that are out there. How do you get through writer's block? What's the purpose of fiction? I've got examples here, right? Pick one question or tension associated with the craft or creativity or literature or fiction, anything to do with that kind of realm. That's the topic that I would be focusing on, okay? 2 examples of that. The topic or the question you might be trying to answer is, what is the purpose of fiction? And some of the perspectives that you answer that with, remember, it's not for and against. It's not don't ask a question that is conducive to a yes, no, for and against argument. You need to set up the question, the kind of the prompt in the right way. So what is the purpose of fiction? You might offer a few different perspectives on that. None of them need to be right or wrong. That's the point. You can just explore different views. You can have a couple of examples from your own life of when you thought that was true, or maybe you show examples of your knowledge of other texts where another perspective is true. They're all kind of true, and you arrive at some kind of final conclusion or thought, but it doesn't have to be like, well, I guess this is the only purpose of fiction. No, it doesn't work like that, right? There are these different views. Maybe you come to some final reflection that, hey, either way, whatever one of these is the case, fiction allows you to do this, or like fiction is important because of this. So good to have some kind of final reflection. I'll come to the structure in a moment. But yeah, what is the purpose of fiction could be a question you ask yourself. And that's what your short discursive piece is going to address. Well, I think it's to escape. People write fictional pieces to escape. They want to, create characters, and they don't want to be themselves, and they want to enter this new world that they've crafted. Amazing. That's true. But also people write fiction to expose a truth. Maybe sometimes you want to create a story to illustrate a point that you think is true. George Orwell created the world of 1984. That was all made up, but it was based on all these truths that he was actually concerned about in the real world. So that's also true. Great. We could even refer to Orwell or other authors who you know that have done that. Maybe it's the prescribed text itself. Maybe that author is an example of one of the perspectives, and that's good intertextuality. You're referring to the prescribed text in your piece while being inspired by the prescribed text. Another perspective might be to reinvent oneself. Okay, you're normally this person. Now you create a character similar to the escape point. Now you create a character that allows you to be someone else. I don't like the person that I am in the real world, or I have this kind of alter ego and I want to explore them. I want to write about them. I want to capture those characteristics and project that into this made-up world. Great. Okay, that's an interesting discursive piece. Hopefully you got a few examples and things there. But again, you're not really pushing any particular points on the reader. You're just exploring these different possibilities, different answers, different reasons. Example 2, where does one's imagination come from? / why do children seem to have greater imaginations? Now, imagination links to creativity, which again is just one of those good topics for a creative exercise like this. You are writing about the craft of writing. Crafting something is creative. So I'm just kind of branching off from creative there and thinking, well, why do we imagine things, and why do people's imaginations shrink as they get older? That's a question to interrogate. There is no specific right or wrong that you need to argue. And maybe there are actual logical reasons. I'm sure there are for some of these questions. Make sure you ask the question in the right way so that it's more coming out of a place of interest and curiosity. It's a genuine sharing or contemplation element of what is a discursive versus asking a question that actually is black and white and has one correct answer, and you then just don't give that answer, or you accidentally do argue a position. That's what you want to avoid. Make sure you have a prompt or a topic that's going to allow you to just explore different related topics to that one main topic, or different kind of perspectives on that one main topic. And that way you get into that discursive mode. Okay, so why would someone have a more limited imagination? Is it because of age? Is it because of people's pasts? Maybe your past means that you can't think as broadly. You weren't brought up to think openly, right? We're victims of age and experience. Or maybe it's the opposite. Maybe the people who have those pasts that were very maybe restricted actually tap into their imagination as a mode of escape. Great, maybe, perhaps. That's the language you use. Maybe, perhaps. You're contemplating. You're not saying this is for sure. You are curious. That is the tone that really needs to sit beneath a discursive in most cases. Okay, the second thing, so you're writing about something to do with creativity or the craft of writing itself. Think about prompts and questions to do with that topic. Ideally, because a lot of the prescribed texts are set up this way, if you're doing a discursive, choose a text that was written in the discursive form, ideally. It doesn't have to be, but ideally it is. And try and choose a prescribed text that you've looked at that does talk about something to do with literature or fiction or writing or the craft. Choose those texts. Again, this is kind of my bias, but I'm just saying the things that I think work really well together. It's just one suggestion here of a combination of things. But try and choose a topic that relates to a topic that was in your prescribed text. So the prescribed text is not only giving you inspiration for how to write in terms of the stylistic elements, like I'm also going to use first-person narrative voice. I'm also going to use an extended metaphor. Great. You need to account for that in your reflection. But I'm also going to write about a similar topic to what the author wrote in that prescribed text. So try and kind of inversely, and if you think about it in the opposite sense, pick a prescribed text that does talk about something to do with the craft that is already in that discursive format, because then it makes it easy to satisfy that. So keep a clear link between the prescribed text and what it talked about and what you talk about. Okay, ideally. Some texts don't talk about the craft of writing at all. That's fine. If you're doing an imaginative, it's a little bit different. But for a discursive, that's definitely the preference. And then thirdly, make sure you choose a topic and frame your topic and prompt in a way that is conducive to exploring different perspectives. And I've already gone through some examples of that. Don't choose a topic or a kind of argument or point of debate that will become this discussion of pros and cons, for and against. Try and choose something open-ended, an open question that you can just throw out some different categories and types and offer some cool insights on the topic without saying something is right or wrong. So you've really got to frame the topic in the right way to avoid that. Okay, so that's the criteria for choosing a topic to write about. It's related to the text, it relates to the craft of writing or something to do with creativity, fiction, etc. And it is a topic that it has different perspectives on it, and they're not perspectives that are just for and against why something is good or bad. Done. Have that criteria, have a good think about it, be guided by your prescribed text at the first instance, and then start playing around with different possible topics that might be similar or a little bit different, or maybe you're going to not argue but do an opposite take that the author took in the prescribed text. So play around with that. That's going to be very helpful, and it's going to be useful for certain prompts or stimuli in the exam. Okay, just checking in here, checking back in. Hopefully this is helpful. Hugo, yes, no worries. Hopefully you are going to email me about that. For an essay on human experiences, would you have a rubric statement at the start or go straight into the text? Okay, that's a good question. You can have like a more general concept at the start, as long as the rubric statement isn't repeating the rubric. Okay, I really don't want you to repeat the rubric or repeat the terms of the question. I would have my opening statement at the top be something conceptual about the human experience. So you don't need to mention your text in that very first sentence, but it does need to respond to the actual key terms of the question. And it does need to provide an insight that goes beyond the question and beyond the rubric. You have to actually provide insights based on your understanding of the text that you've studied. Okay, so even though you're not mentioning the text, you're still drawing upon the key ideas of the text to articulate the core tension, and you're going to incorporate some words of the rubric and, most importantly, the words of the question to convey that concept. So yes, you can have a concept or idea at the top, but, and I'll just come out of this for a second, when you are doing your thesis statements for a common mod essay, you can have a concept at the top, but the idea in that statement should still be drawn from the prescribed text that you've studied and that you'll introduce in the second sentence. It can also work to introduce the text in the very first sentence as well, as long as you're getting straight into your thesis and your key concept or key argument for the essay, and you're using those keywords of the question. Okay, last section here. How do I structure my discursive piece of writing? Okay, so again, just looking at discursive in this one, happy to do a similar session on persuasive and imaginative as well. So let me know in the comments if you want me to do a similar breakdown of those different text types and even reflective writing as well. We've also got some content on YouTube, but I'm going to be making some more things just to kind of refresh everyone's understanding of that. And in case you haven't seen any of the past videos, make some new ones that are nice and up to date with the current exam structure and style. Okay, so very simply, how do you structure a discursive piece of writing? Generally speaking, it's always good to start with an anecdote. So that could be a personal anecdote, a little story. Only needs to be like one paragraph, a few sentences that is going to allow you to establish a relevant example from your own life. It can be made up though, of course. A relevant example from your speaker's life. It's personal to the speaker, or it could be a story about someone else. But I like when it's personal to you because a discursive is very personal. So you have the anecdote. It's a short story or recollection. I always like when it's like you're recalling something that happened when you were a kid. I remember when I was a kid and, my mom told me to write a story and all I could think to write about was this. And I thought, why can't I come up with any other ideas? And then you get into like how the imagination felt constrained and you start reflecting on, well, where do we get imagination? I feel like imagination comes from a few different places. Boom, perspectives. Now I'm getting into all of those different places. So just like that, you start with a story about maybe an example of when you're a kid, just a basic example, like when you were a kid, when I was a child, my mom always asked me to write a short story every week, but I always wrote about the same thing, right? It was as though my mind was trapped in this kind of unidimensional loop. My mind Anyway, not going to go through a whole thing now, but hopefully that you get the gist just off that. Like, you've got to have this anecdote, ideally a personal anecdote. And again, it can be made up. No one's going to come in, and Marco's not going to come and verify that everything you said in your discursive was true. Oh, I checked your family photos and I saw that wasn't the case. No one's doing that. It can help to draw upon real personal experiences because it's more authentic. That's the benefit of doing that. You can probably speak to that with more authenticity, which is going to come out in your voice, and you're going to feel more confident writing about it, and you're going to avoid having kind of different tonalities for the wrong reasons throughout your piece. You're going to have that cohesion, but it doesn't have to be exact, okay? It's still a fictional piece. It's still creative writing. You're still creating ideas here. So, personal anecdote, short story about something that's going to help segue into the topic, the thing you want to explore. So then you introduce the topic. And by the way, these aren't all necessarily one paragraph each, but you can kind of play around. I think playing around and experimenting with the paragraph lengths is a really powerful thing to do. Keeps the marker interested as well. Prevents your piece from looking like everyone else's, where it's just these blocks, big blocks of text, very daunting, can become very boring, even if the substance is really interesting. Keep the form and the structure dynamic. Keep it experimental. Have some one-word paragraphs. Have some one-sentence paragraphs to help transition and to help go between points, and be playful with that. That's something you can experiment as you get confident with your writing and you perfect your draft. Start playing around with the structure, the lengths, because that is a key way to stand out. And that comes to, like, how do I actually write it? This is how do I structure it, but how do I write it? You've got to write it with some experimental form, different paragraph lengths, play with your syntax. But also, of course, you are using at least 2 stylistic features from a prescribed text, okay? We're not just using the prescribed text to get an idea of what to write about. We're using it to say, hey, I want to use a first person voice, and maybe it's going to be very, like, conversational, like we talked about. If you've used a discursive text as your prescribed text, that's probably going to be the case. And I like how they used this extended metaphor throughout. And I'm going to use my own extended metaphor. Don't use the same one. Use a different one for a different purpose, for your purpose of your piece, because you're writing about something slightly different. And then you can talk about how you use those things in the reflection. And you can even provide an example of how the prescribed text and the author of the prescribed text used them, and how your purpose was slightly different. They used it for this reason. I used it to do this to my reader. So that you need to have a purpose that always links to a certain impact on the reader. Always think about what is the impact on the reader for both you using this particular feature or the author of the prescribed text doing it. And then you can account for both of those things and even contrast them in your reflection. Okay, that's a bit of a tangent, but a very important point. Personal anecdote will help segue into your introduction of the topic, something that you're curious about or that you've been thinking about. That's how that it should sound. So you're curious about and have been thinking about. Now you're going to share a few different perspectives on it that you've thought about, right? It's not like you're coming in blind. Otherwise, you wouldn't have anything to say. Okay, it's just got to sound quite improvised in a sense, right? But it still needs to be polished. So you got to get that balance. That's just the difference between preparation and tone. The tone is conversational, but you've prepared it perfectly. Okay, now you're going to share your thoughts. You're going to take us on a journey of your thoughts, but you're not going to try and convince us that one perspective is the only perspective that's true, okay? Okay, then you get into your perspectives and you say, well, look, the purpose of fiction when I was a kid, I used to try and escape. And these are some other people who try to escape. And here's why you might try to escape. Purpose of fiction to escape. And you might have an extended metaphor to explore this concept. It's really good in a discursive piece to have an extended metaphor. Okay, so I'm going to put here with your perspectives, and when you introduce the topic, even if your prescribed text doesn't do this, I would strongly, strongly recommend you do this. It's almost an essential, I would say it is an essential ingredient for a really good discursive, is to have some extended metaphors in there to illustrate the different perspectives. Illustrate and differentiate the perspectives. Okay, that's a bit harsh, isn't it, that highlight? Boom. Okay, great. So you're going to do that. Purpose of fiction. What about this one? Purpose of fiction is to reinvent. Reinvent yourself, right? Or you want to expose a truth. Okay, great. And you can talk about these different purposes, and you can create a kind of metaphorical label for each one. Like, oh, okay, who is someone who escapes? This is really key. If you want to create an extended metaphor about, oh, what's the purpose of fiction? Well, people write about fiction for different reasons. Some people try to escape. Okay, now who is someone who tries to escape? Someone maybe who breaks out of prison. The prison breaker. I'm just spitballing ideas here. This is how you kind of think about it. Maybe this is the prison breaker. See how that's a metaphor? Like, you're not actually someone who breaks out of prison, but you're saying the kind of person who would create a piece of fiction to escape because they want to break out of their real world. I'm going to call them the prison breaker. And that's a metaphor because it shows how they're trying to break out of a figurative prison, the prison of their life. They want to create something else. Then you have someone who reinvents, right? So maybe you have again, you need to find a label, a metaphorical label for each of these things. This is a really, really sophisticated thing. If you can do it, you just have to put some thought into it up front. Like, who's going to be the truth person? Who's someone who's a truth teller? Like, find a good label, a good kind of character type that would be a truth teller, right? Maybe it's the preacher, someone who preaches truth, right? The preacher, the prison breaker. See where we're going with this? And then who's the person who reinvents themselves? Now I'm thinking of people who like to reinvent, who like to, kind of resurrect and build. Okay, well, resurrect makes me think of those birds that kind of burn themselves to ashes and resurrect. Isn't that the phoenix? Okay, so now, if I can spell it correctly, so now what you have is you have 3 different perspectives that you're going to explore in these paragraphs, and you've come up with these labels that are going to allow you to talk about these different types, because again, it's not for and against. You're going to talk about these different types through these figurative labels and categories. Okay, this is the prison breaker. This person's trying to break out of the cage of their real world. And you keep coming back to language to do with prison. Then you say, oh, but there's also the phoenix, and they like to resurrect themselves. They burn their old identities to ashes. You keep making all of your descriptions linked to the phoenix. And then you have the preacher. Okay, this person, they're trying to tell us the truth. And maybe you come up with something better than this, but you have this more like religious language about a preacher, right? There, and then you keep using language to do with something a preacher would do. Search on Google, use GPT to come up with a list of things that would be associated with these different categories, and then you can put these nice perspectives together and write about the differences in metaphorical terms, use the extended metaphor, and then get to a final reflection. Okay, you get to a final reflection at the end. Maybe it's a few lines, maybe it's a couple of short paragraphs, maybe it's one sentence, but it's nice to always link it back to that anecdote. If you had an anecdote about when you were a kid, so now when I think back, to those stories, to story time. If story time was the thing that you were talking about. Now when I think back to story time, I can't help but realize that da-da-da-da-da. And you realize something and it connects all the perspectives in some way. Great. Hopefully that helps. I think that's a pretty clear breakdown. A few really important tips in there of how to build an effective discursive. And a little caution here, start with the end in mind. Don't just start writing your anecdote before you've thought about all of these other things. Plan ahead. You must plan. And I mean this in the drafting phase. Don't spend your whole exam time planning. You should have already done all of that. You'll be able to use a lot of what you've prepared if you've addressed these particular topics, but you need to be really well-versed at adapting to different stimuli and questions and be willing to give up a lot of your piece as well. But the reason why you definitely want to perfect a draft for craft of writing, because people always say, oh, you can't prepare for it. You can, because it's training you. It's training you in terms of those stylistic elements, because you've actually perfected writing with extended metaphors. So now you'll be able to do extended metaphors about something else, right? But ideally, you'll be able to keep a lot of the same as well. Okay, you must plan before you start writing each part, okay? A lot of people don't like to do it. They like to just start writing and feel like they're making progress. You need to sit down, brainstorm, map it all out. It's going to take a few hours just to kind of get some kind of structure. You're going to revisit it. You're going to think, does this all make sense? Then you flesh out each point. Then you start converting all of the breakdowns of each point into actual sentences, right? But do as much planning and breakdown as possible. Put all your ideas for the metaphors in. Talk about different things you could talk about in relation to the prison breaker. Like, okay, it's like the cage, and they try to like bend the bars at times, and they often get chased and brought back to prison by the real world, right? They get chased by society, not by guards, because maybe it's the guards of society, and brought back to their cell. Yeah, it's this, you brainstorm all of the language that can go with it, and then that gives you all the material to flesh out. But you need to do all of that all the way to the end. You always need to know how you're going to end before you start writing the whole thing in full, okay? They are my key tips for discursive writing, something that comes up a lot. So I really do hope that helps. Although I'm going to end it there unless there are any questions. Master Pooh, great to see you. It's a familiar name, familiar face. I'm glad it doesn't match the name. Can you have a look at my mod beat intro and analytical for a doll's house? Yes, you just have to use the link in these live streams. There's a link there to submit your response. You can put your intro, make sure you have a question for it that I can look at as well. But if you submit that, you will go in the queue and I will have a look. Next Tuesday, 7:30, let's do it. Guys, submit your responses. Now's the best time to get feedback from me, and I can help you improve these pieces. So thanks for joining. Hopefully that did help on the discursive piece. You're all going to have to do it. Maybe you're not all studying it right now, but it is an essential skill. Remember, in the HSC, you might be asked to do a discursive. You don't always get a choice of all three options. So you've got to be prepared. You've got to know how to actually write a discursive. And then we can talk about in future sessions how you could actually adapt a persuasive or an imaginative into a discursive without having to write a whole new thing for every single type. Okay, so that's to come. Have a great evening. Great to check in with all of you. I hope this helped. Make sure you check out Jeddle.com if you need any help with your text. If you need analysis, Band 6 analysis for all of your text, you need help building the essay, go to Jeddle.com, sign up. Go to JeddAI on Jeddle.com if you want to get feedback from our team, right? Obviously, I'll do feedback on these sessions, but if you want feedback, more promptly and more regularly, so you can really start iterating and building a perfect essay, a perfect discursive, perfect whatever, you've got to get access to the best people. So that's, look at that. Testy Pop, that tells me I am ready to finish. That's what JeddAI does. It gives you access to, tutors who are basically there solely to help you advance the quality of your response. All right. Great to see you. Losing my voice. See you in the next one.